So, all right, as you see, we're going to be talking about kvasim, sheep in the Torah. The animal that is mentioned most in Torah out of all other animals is sheep. We're finishing today Chumash Bereshis. So in Bereshis it was very often brought down about sheep. The Ovis were shepherds, and the Shvatim were shepherds, and many stories about that. And also Chumash Shmois is going to be brought down as Karbonis, and later on Vayikra also Karbonis. We're going to focus today specifically on two topics, and that is the name of the sheep. As we'll see in Torah, there are numerous names, so we'll go through all the names and explain what each name means, and at the same time we'll give some other interesting information about them, and also a number of things about some famous shepherds, and some short stories about them. Some of the things that we're going to say now, we already said in the Chumash class, but we'll say it now over for those that were not there. First of all, regarding the names. So how many names do we have for sheep in the Torah? There's altogether 7 different names. Tzoin, Se, Ayil, Rochel, Tola, Pilgos, and Kar. And, of course, the name Keves Kisro. So really it's 8 names. And these names were specifically focusing on sheep. As we'll see later, some of these names have a shaykhis to goats as well. And goats has some names which the word Eis, for example, only means a goat. No shaykhis to sheep. But then there's other names that also have a shaykhis that besides Eis. But we're going to focus on only the names that include sheep somehow. So, the first name is Tzoin. Tzoin is a name which includes Kvasim, Izim, Gdoilim, Ktanim, Schodim, and Akevis. Meaning, Tzoin includes everything. The word Tzoin includes sheep and goats, older ones and younger ones, males and females. Everything is included in Tzoin, and often in the Torah we have Bakar, Vatzoin, and Tzoin includes all of them. Now, although beside the word tzoin, they work together. So indeed, many times shepherds assume that sheep and goats are the same thing. And there's a story a while, about maybe 20 years ago, maybe less. There was a Yid that moved to this area, about an hour away from here, not a religious Jew, and he wanted to open up a farm. Like many people, he came from New York. He had this idea to have a farm, and he fulfilled his dream. He opened up a farm. He bought a whole bunch of sheep, a whole bunch of goats. He didn't ask anybody for advice. He just did what he wanted to do, a little bit of research, not too much, and he fed everything. He fed all the animals that were all the sheep and goats together. And the next morning he came up. He came to his barn, and all of the sheep were dead. And he had no idea what happened. What happened is what it says over here is that the main difference between sheep and goats is that there's something called a copper supplement. Meaning, of course, you can't eat a penny mamish, but there's a mineral, the mineral copper. So goats need it in order for them to survive, and for sheep, it's fatal. It causes them to die. So that's why if you ever decide to open up a farm, remember this, that you can have sheep and goats. When you feed them, you have to feed them separately. The goats must have copper, and the sheep are not allowed to have copper. I guess he did enough research to know that he has to get copper for his goats. But he didn't get enough research to know that you're not allowed to have copper for your sheep. But in general, they are definitely included together. They're considered to be one general group. But when you feed them, specifically, you have to be very careful to separate them. The name Se is specifically for Kvasim Vizim Ktanim Schodim Unakevis. Tzoim was everything, and this name Se can be either it's specifically young, but it can be a young sheep or a young goat. It can be a young male sheep or a young female sheep or young male goat, young female goat. Sometimes it'll say Se Kvasim or Se Izim, and in that case, obviously, it's referring to specifically to either a sheep or a goat. But the word Se for itself, so it's not like Korban Pesach, it says to bring a Se. So over there, it can mean any. When we say young, but that can mean under 1 year old, and that's what the word Se means. Kevis, a young goat or sheep. It's time for those that are interested in these kind of things. So there's something called the Ovis aria species. That's what the sheep are, and they have 54 chromosomes. What's a chromosome? Anybody knows? Okay. And then the goat has 60 chromosomes, and then there's difference in the way their tails, the way their tails are, and a little bit in the way they eat as well. So in this here, we're not focusing on the copper part that was mentioned before, but what they end up eating. So goats will typically browse on leaves and shrubs, and sheep will more eat on grass and clover. If you go to a petting zoo, so choosing the petting zoos, they usually give you food what to give them. But if you go around here, you go to petting zoos, places where it's more open, so you'll see that the sheep and goats, if you offer them grass and stuff, you'll see that they'll naturally on their own, they'll go to different things when you offer it to them. Which is one of the niflois habayda the Eibishter gave, that the animals know exactly what they should. If the copper is mixed in, then the sheep is not going to notice that. Like you mentioned before, that can be dangerous. But if it's open clearly, then the animals have this natural tendency to know what's good for them, what's bad for them. That's why it's very rare for animals to eat things that are unhealthy for them. And say, as Zechronis is a famous story that the animals were eating or drinking things which were not healthy for them, and then over there he has a whole arichas about it, that even though that they're in the wild all the time and there's all the grass in front of them, but derech klal, most of the time they know what's good for them and what's bad for them. The next thing is a ayil. When we say ayil means a keves, zochar, godel, specifically a sheep, specifically a male, and specifically old. Old means over a year old. So ayil only means that. Now, there's an important word similar, which is ayol, and ayol is a chayot tahira. Ayol is a type of deer. We know that there are 7 kosher chayos, which is behemoths and chayos. Behemoths means the domesticated animals, and chayos means non-domesticated animals. We know that the behemoths, the kosher ones, are only cows, sheep, and goats, and the kosher chayos are basically different types of deer, deer and gazelle, whatever they are. Then there's the discussion about a giraffe. But akopanim, one of the kosher chayos is called the ayol with the comets. So ayil is a keves. Sometimes you might even say with a comets ayol and refer to the keves zachar godel, but the proper word would be ayil, and then it will be ayol. Also interesting, in English there's a special word for an older keves zachar, and that is, how do you call an older keves, an older sheep, a male older sheep? A ram. That's the proper term for a keves zachar godel. That's what an ayil is. Then we have a rochel. A rochel means a kisva gdoilo. This Bacham don't realize that many names we have for people are really names of animals. Tzvi Hirsch, Arya Leib. So too the name Rochel is really a name of a sheep. I do not know who's the first one that gave Rochel the name Rochel. I mean, in Torah, obviously, we know is Rochel Imenu, and that's what Rochel means. It means a female sheep, specifically an older sheep. And who knows how to say a Rochel in English? Anybody knows how to say a female sheep in English? The word is a u, E-W-E, or a u, a u, how to pronounce it. But a female sheep is a rochel. That's what the rochel means. The psukim in Tanakh talks about kerochel ifnei goyz azan alama. Sometimes in the piyutim we'll have the word rochel as well, and it's going to refer to female sheep, not to rochel imenu. Then we have a tola. A tola means a keves tzoir, a young sheep, specifically keves and not goat. We had before seh. So seh was general, included sheep and goats. Tola is more specific to sheep, and when it says tzoir, it's even younger than a seh, which means that it's still nursing. So tola and seh are similar, but tola seems to be earlier. However, in Chazal's mashma, that tola is an entire year, meaning even after when it stops nursing, it's still considered a tola. So the pashas a seh and a tola are very, very famous. All the other names we're trying to isolate, to explain what each name is different than the other ones. So the names that are the most closest and the hardest to differentiate is a seh and a tola. Tola, the proper way is saying a tola. Usually you say a tle. That's the way it's pronounced when you learn. So a seh and a tala are usually considered the same thing, but specifically says more. If you want to make a difference, the difference would be that first of all, seh is sheep and goats, and it's the entire year, and the tala is specifically sheep, and it's earlier in the year when it's still young. Then we have a pilgos. A pilgos is a name that's not really mentioned in Tanakh, it's only mentioned in Mishnayos. A pilgos is a name for a sheep between 1 year old and 13 months and 1 day old. It's like lahavdil by humans, you have children, adults, and you have teenagers. So in a human's life, so the teenage years are approximately 8 to 10 years, whatever, 12 to 20, to count however you want to count it. So in an animal's life, people talk about an animal, if there's a stage of teenagers, when the animal becomes mature, it's usually from child to adult. So by a sheep, we have something called a pilgos, which is that 1 month of its life where it's an in-between. It's not kosher. Whenever you have to bring a carbon that's a year old, you cannot bring the pilgos. You have to bring a ayil, which is over a year old. You can't bring the pilgos either. It's an in-between stage. So that's the only nafkamina really is regarding karbanis, that you have to know that if it's that month. So if you, Mitzvah Mashiach is going to come, we're all going to become farmers. We're going to have all of our sheep. So you're going to have to remember what the age of your sheep are. So if it's younger than a year, it can be brought as a carbon. If it's older than 13 months, it can be brought as a carbon. But if it's that month in between, it cannot be brought as a carbon. But the evidence, halachas, what happens if you brought it by mistake? You didn't know what to do with it. But a pilgos cannot be brought as a carbon until it turns the age of 13. Then we have the word called kar. Kar is a keves shomen mefutum. Kar specifically applies to big fat sheep. That's what the name kar means. We have karim sometimes in Tanakh. It talks about it different places. So just for information, what is the average weight of a sheep? So the smaller ones are between 150 to 175 pounds, and the larger breeds can reach up to 300 pounds for an adult ram, which is, compared to cows, obviously not a lot, but compared to people, it's I guess pretty much close. Some people can compete maybe. But that's what the kar means. A keves shaman mefutum. Usually, it's not a natural thing. Meaning a kar, usually, even though in this what it says in the bottom is natural. Some breeds naturally will be heavier, but when it comes to a kar, it means it was dafka stuffed. That it wasn't. It's not a natural thing. When I came to Postal many years ago, so Shalom Artcha was telling me about the cows they have here in Agri. He said these cows are not normal cows. These cows are stuffed to become fat. He says it's like the Havdil. You see a person that's very, very fat. Everyone looks at him right away, knows this person is not regular. So all the cows that Agri shechs are those kind of cows. They're chatchila stuffed to be very fat. So a kar, the word kar means that it's not stam naturally fat. It was mefutam. It was stuffed. It was fed a lot in order to become fat. So afterwards, when you shech it, you'll have a lot of lamb chops. And then we come to the name keves or kesev. So keves or kesev, this is a general word for all sheep, meaning not goats but sheep. But this is older and younger. An older sheep is dafka either a ayil or a rochel or a pilgos for that 1 month. A younger sheep is either a seh or a tle. But keves and kesev applies to the entire mean. Anything which is a sheep, whether it's younger or older, all of that is included in the name keves. And some people say that it's specifically dafka when it's younger than a year old. That's specifically what keves means. And like I said, the word keves or kesef, that's the word which is most frequently used in the animal, which is mentioned most often in Torah, is the name keves. The big question is it keves or kesef? Oh, something else about seh and keves. I mentioned before that seh is also younger, so this is another thing that people say, that seh is only after 7 days, and keves and A's also can be even a day old. So basically a young sheep can have 3 names: seh, keves, and tle. So keves would be already from 1 day, says only after 7 days, and tle is the rest of the year. But this is all. This is different mefarshim. They'll have to highlight different psukim and mishnayos and make the yukim, and that's all they get to this pirush. But the question is keves or kesev. So sometimes in Torah you'll have the word keves, kaf vei sin, and sometimes you'll have kesev, kaf sin vei. So what's the reason behind it? Is there a difference in the meanings, or is it just the same thing? So altogether, I was able to come up with 6 different explanations. Not my own biyurim, obviously. That's brought down in the Mefarshei HaMikra, and we'll see also al Pichsidis, the different explanations and the different ways of spelling it. So the most simple explanation is that the Pashas, there is no difference, and most Mefarshim say that for whatever reason, and they usually bring this actually as an example, that often you have words in Tanakh that are spelled in different places, different ways. So the Mefarshim will say, well, just like Keves and Kesef means the same thing, even though it's spelled differently, so also the other words mean the same thing. And that's the accepted pshat. The accepted pshat is that you don't have to go and find an explanation for Keves and Kesef. It's just that Eibishter decided it has 2 names for the same word, and that's why it's the same thing. It is no different meaning. However, the Malbim, and others have Pirushim as well, the Malbim's Pirush is like this. The Malbim says that Kesev, Ksovim, that's for the shame of the min. When you talk about the entire species as a herd, or a flock, then you're going to say Ksovim, with a Kaf Sinvez, and he says also you'll find when it says Ksovim, it's usually next to the other groups, the groups of the cattle and the groups of goats. So Mamela, he says that Kesev is specifically referring to the general species, not to individual sheep. And another pirush that he brings is that kesev, if you break up the word kesev, is kes of shamanta avisa kasisa, meaning that it's very big and strong. And that's specifically regarding the aliyah. The aliyah means the tail of the sheep. That the aliyah of the tail of the sheep is very fatty. That's why by karbonis. So when it comes to a cow and a goat, when you shech the cow and a goat on the carbon, so you don't bring it on the mizbeach itself. You only bring either the fats or you bring the flesh, the blood, obviously. But the tail of the cow and the tail of the goat, that's never put onto the mizbeach. The only animal that its tail goes on the mizbeach is the aliyah, the sheep, because it's more fatty and it's more shaman. So the Meili Taishas Kesev is when we're saying Kesev, we're referring to this koyach that it has. So Kvosim says before it's Ksavim as in the min, but another Taish of the word Kesev is that it is thick and heavy, referring to this prat that it has. Keves, What does keves mean? Regarding keves is that it's added semer, because the seder is that you take the wool of the sheep and you wash it in order to use it for wool, for clothing, for material. So that's what the word keves means, referring to the wool of it. So these two pirushim, kesev and keves, now you have to go through Chumash and Tanakh and find every time it says kesev and keves and see if it fits. Like why tak is the seder here stressing the fact that it's strong and it's a fat tail, and here it's stressing the fact that it's a keves and you can wash its wool. Ich weiß nicht, but that's the way Mefarshim want to say the difference between kesev and keves. Regard either we're focusing on its strength or on its shamnunis, or we're focusing on the fact that we wash its wool. Fifth Pirush of the Netziv. The Netziv says kevesh is when it's younger, and that's what kevesh means. Kavush mayoni. Kavush means that it's stuffed, meaning it cannot reproduce, it cannot give birth because it's too young. And ksavim are g'deilim yeser when they're able to give birth. That's what the Netziv teaches. Again, kevesh is it's younger, specific. And why younger? Because the same shadish of kevesh is kavush. Kavush means that it's dried up, it can't reproduce. And ksavim is when it's older already and it's able to reproduce. Then there's a pirush that I found in the name of the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek first brings out the gematria. The gematria of keves, each individual letter. So kaf we know is 20, and beis is 2, and sin is 300. So he says like this. He says there's something called gematria ktana. Gematria ktana is when you take away the zeros. So if you take away the zeros of shin, it ends up being 3. So basically, it would be either kaf 2 3 or kaf 3 2. So he explains al pi chassidus a difference that sometimes kaf is referring to keser, and there's one seder of ishtalshalus where kaf goes into beis, which is the chachma bina, that are trained delay misparshin. The two levels of chachma bina are considered to go together always, and shin is 3, like we mentioned, the gematria ktana. That's referring to the 3 midas of chesed gvura tiferes. So whenever it says keves, it's referring to the regular seder ishtalshalus. And when it says kesev, so here we're talking about chesed gvura tiferes, and then chachma bina, the arich, meaning this is in kesed itself. Sometimes it says lamaila, the midas have a higher shadish, and over there they come before the seichel. So when it says kesev, it's referring to that level, the way they are, the way the midas are b'sharsham, and in the source where the midas come before the seichel. Those are the biyurim in keves and kesef. Now we're going to talk about a number of famous shepherds. When it comes to shepherds, of course, like we mentioned before, there's Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and the Shvatim were shepherds. But we're only going to focus on some of them that are mentioned, and that is Hevel, Noach, Yaakov, Moshe, and David. I have a few questions on some of them and different interesting biyurim that we were able to come up with. So the first shepherd that we know was Hevel, as it says in the Pasuk in Parshas Bereshis, Vayi Hevel roye tzoyin. And afterwards, when it came time for Hevel to bring karbanis to Hashem, so Hevel brought karbanis. He brought mibchayres tzoynayu mechelveyan. So the tzoyin we already learned before means from all of his sheep and goats he brought karbanis. And after that, Cain got upset at him. Cain was jealous that Hashem accepted the carbon of Hevel, not his own carbon. So therefore, Cain el Hevel ochi vayargeyu. Cain ended up killing Hevel. So two questions that we can ask is, number one, why did Hevel choose to be a roye tzoyin, a shepherd? And number two, when exactly did it happen? When exactly did Hevel die? Some people wonder, was it before Chedei Tzadas, after Chedei Tzadas? Was it there before? How long afterwards did it happen? So regarding why he chose to be a roye tzoyin, to be a shepherd, so Rashi explains that this was already after the Adama was cursed. And either it was cursed l'chatchila because it didn't produce when Hashem said to give Hashem said to give out the Esav and the Ilonis, it came separately, or it was cursed by Chedei Tzadas. According to this, obviously, he chose to be a shepherd after Chedei Tzadas. So since the earth was cursed, so Hevel said, I don't want to be a farmer to work with the ground, I want to be a shepherd to work with sheep that are not the ground itself. So that's obviously from the tzidkus of Hevel. He didn't want to deal with something which is cursed, which Hashem is unhappy with. The Svarna explains that being a shepherd is more a meleches chachma. It takes more intelligence than to be a meleches adam. So even though you would think that to work the ground, there's a lot more seichel involved. You have to know how to plant and how to harvest and at what time to do that. Versus a shepherd, all you do is just you walk around with your animals and you sit and play a flute and that's it. So the Svarna says no. To be a shepherd, you have to be a real chacham because you have to real plan everything out every single day. The farmer, when he plants the ground, so back in the beginning, there's cheshbonus of how to plant, and at the end of the harvest, how to cut everything. But for most of the time, there isn't really much of a chachma. Versus the shepherd has to make cheshbonus every day. So obviously, it's not too much chachma. chachma, not too much involvement, because that's why the Ovis chose to be shvatim, to be royim, to be shepherds, to be away from Gashmias. But there is chachma all the time, and since Hevel was a bigger chacham, he look for he doesn't explain, he looked for the bigger challenge, or just because he was a chacham, so he wanted to use his chachma more. Whatever the case, the Sforno explains this as his explanation that Hevel chose to be a shepherd because it's a meleches chachma, yesrim and meleches adam. The Klayakar has a whole long explanation about what's the reason why Hevel chose to be a royit. So, and he says it's based on a general machlokes that Cain and Hevel had regarding what shleimus adam. What does it mean that a person is successful in life? Everyone wants to be successful. So what's considered hatzlacha? So one opinion, one derech is if you make a lot of money and you become famous, that's considered hatzlacha. That's the big shleimus that a person can reach. And the other opinion is that this world is not a sky. This world is only a temporary place. It's a hallway in order to get to the real world. And the real hatzlacha is olam ha'emes. So says the Klayakar, this was the machlekes of Cain and Hevel. Cain was Eiv Adama. Cain made a cheshbon that this is the world that we are now. This is the best world. There's no world after this, and therefore he chose to be involved with this world, which Adama is. The whole world is made out of the earth. That's what we're on. So he focused on this. That was his hatzlacha. He thought there's nothing else besides this, and that's the meaning of when we say that Cain chose to be a farmer to work with the ground. It means to say that he didn't look at anything else besides this world. That's what his interests were. That's what he thought is the main shleimus of a person. Versus Hevel saw that there's another world afterwards. That's the real tachlis, and that's why by choosing to be a reyet soin, which we know, like I mentioned before, that's the hisbreidus of the Ovis. So this way, he was able to get closer to Hashem, to realize that this world is not the tachlis. There's no point to make money and be famous and all those kind of things. That's not tachlis hakavana. A tachlis hakavana is elam hamis, is eibishter, tzedek mitzvahs, and that's why he chose to be a shepherd to stay away from this world. Question: when exactly was Hevel killed? So we found 3 pirushim. In Medrash Rabbah it says, Kuli Alma, he didn't live more than 50 days. That's what the Medrash Rabbah says. Meaning in all the opinions that are brought in Medrash Rabbah, it couldn't have been more than 50 days after he was created. And Medrash Tanchuma says he was 40 years old, which implies that for 40 years he lived, and according to this pshat, what the Medrash Tanchuma says, you can have a question, if he lived for 40 years, why didn't he have children in those 40 years? Especially according to the next explanation, next opinion that says he was 100 years old. So if he was 40, especially if he was 100 years old, the Chayri should have had children. Why do we find later that Cain, when Cain killed Hevel, so Hashem told Hevel Hashem told Cain that Hevel's blood, Hevel's children, they're crying from the ground because you killed him, he wasn't able to have children. So either it means that Hevel could have had more children, or another pshat may be able to be said, and I didn't see this anywhere, but maybe it could be said that it's brought down that when Adam Rishon was created, Hashem created him already in the image of a 20-year-old. So maybe at those times, when Hevel was born, he was born right away, and he grew so quickly that he was in the capabilities or the look of a 40-year-old or a 100-year-old. Whatever there might be the beard in them. Huh?
Also, didn't have kids for 600, no?
So Noach, it says specifically till 500 didn't have kids because Hashem didn't want him to be matriach him with building many more marbles. But over here, what's the cheshbon? I mean, even though in Chumash it says over there a lot of people only had children at the age of 100, so maybe that's the pshat. And those times they didn't have children before.
You could say he was in the 50 days. He looked like he was 40, but his chachma was like 100 years old.
All right, and then a nice pshat of all 3 together. The next shepherd is Noach. So Noach wasn't known as a shepherd. Noach was more known as a zookeeper. But obviously, part of being a zookeeper was also taking care of the sheep. And like it says in the pasuk, "Mikola behema tahira tikach lecha shiva ish ve'ishtoi, u'min behema shaloi tahira ishnayim ish ve'ishtoi." And from the non-kosher animals, he took in only 2. From the kosher animals, he took in 7. But here there's a question: he took in 7 shiva ish ve'ishtoi. The question is, how many sheep did he actually bring into the teva? And then another question that the Mefarshim ask is, how many types of sheep did Noach bring into the teva? There are many different breeds in sheep. All animals have many different breeds. Regarding sheep specifically, there are people that say that there are 1,000 different types of sheep. That means he brought in 7,000 sheep into the teva. For each breed, he brought in 1. So this is a question not only for sheep, but it really applies to all of the animals, that there are many animals that have many, many species. So did Noach bring each separate species, or did he just bring in 1? So regarding the question, how many sheep did he actually bring into the teva from each species? So Bepashas as Mashi, he brought in only 7, which would mean that he brought in 3 pairs. 3 Scharim and 3 Nekevis, and then he brought one more Zachar. And the last Zachar was for the carbon, meaning when he came out, so he brought one as a carbon, and which explains also, people say, some people learn that he brought all as karbanis. If all of them were karbanis, then what did he gain by bringing in more? But Pashto says, the Chayre, you brought in more because these animals get preyed upon, and they're more endangered, so there has to be more of them. So according to this pshat that he only brought in 7, so there were 3 pairs in order to reproduce more sheep, and then there was one Zachar, which was brought as a carbon. So this is what's mashma in this Sifsei Chachamim. However, the Medrash Rabbah clearly says that there were Shiva Scharim and Shiva Nekevis, meaning altogether 14, and Al Derech Zeh Pashtus applies to the cows and to the goats as well, that there were 14 of each one of them, but according to the Sifsei Chachamim, only 7. The question would be, what about the kosher deer? Deer are kosher as well. However, deer cannot be brought as a carbon. So the question would be, if it was, did he bring 7 deer because they're kosher, or did he only bring 2 because you cannot bring karbanos for them? That I did not see Mefarshim talking about. Regarding the question, how many types of flosim? So the Radal, Reb David Luria, different times the Reb Marash, the Tzemach Tzedek. So he has a pirush on the Medrash called Pirkei de Reb Eliezer. So he brings this question and he says, even though we see many different species, for example, in dogs, many different types, he said when Hashem created them, there was only one dog and only one sheep. And over time they evolved and they ended up developing into many different species afterwards. So he says, since it was one original one, so Shalit Bailami, the Eibishter, Yedea Bibruv, he knows his creations, so he told Noach to take the original species of each one of them. The Eibishter knows that this species, once it'll be brought into the Teva, it'll be able to reproduce and develop into all other meaning. So today the question would be, out of all the species, what's the original species of sheep? Now some people say this muflan, whatever that's how to pronounce it, this picture is a picture of a sheep, which they claim this is the original breed of sheep. That means the question is not so much of a question in the first place, because you could say that before the Mabul there was talking, there weren't too many species, there was just one species, and only after the Mabul the species ended up developing into different types. But B'cholif, and this is what the Radal says, Pshat, that there were many species before the Mabul as well, but Noach only took in one species of each, and Hashem told him which one was the original one. There was by dogs and all other animals, he took the original one, and after that redeveloped, which this can also answer a different question. If you look about how many animals there are in the world, the size of Noach's Teva wouldn't fit all of them. So how is it possible that they all fit? So you can say it's a miracle. But according to this answer, you can say that many of the animals, for example, wild cats, that there are tigers and leopards and cheetahs and cougars and all these different animals, it's very possible that they're really all cousins, are really all related, and they took in the original one, and from that original one, the other ones eventually evolved into different separate species. Al derech by the deer and goats and bears, for example, there's polar bears, grizzly bears, brown bears, black bears, all the different types of bears out there. It could be that he took in one type of bear, and all the other ones developed over time. Again, this could be a pshat. I didn't see this written down, but based on what the Radal says, it could make sense. The next shepherd is Yaakov Avinu. From the 3 of us, the one that we talk mostly about him being a shepherd is Yaakov. Yaakov, it says, he became very wealthy. He had a lot of tzoin. Rashi says over there that the reason why it says tzoin rabbis first is because he made his money off tzoin, and then he sold the tzoin, and with that he bought shvachis, avodim, gmalim, and chamodim. Basically, all of his possessions were thanks to the sheep that he had. That was the yesod of his riches. So regarding Yaakov, how did he have so many sheep? So this we learned in Chumash recently. The Yaakov had all the sheep. There were 3 things that it says in the Psukim. Number 1 was the sticks, that he put the sticks when the sheep would go to drink, he would put the sticks and he would make different colors on the sticks. And when the sheep saw when the sheep were drinking the water and saw the sticks with the colors, so naturally it had an effect that their babies should have the same patterns on their skin. A second thing that it says is the adorim, that he made them into separate herds or separate flocks of different patterns, and he put the ones that were pregnant or that were in heat, that were about to get pregnant, he put them behind, that they should be looking towards the other ones that were with certain patterns, and this way they saw that and they naturally ended up having those kind of babies with those patterns. And then there's a third thing which says that the Malachim came, and the Malachim, they brought the sheep with those patterns from Lavan's herd, from Lavan's flock, and they brought that to Yaakov. So that's another explanation. So the question is, what really happened over here? So there are a number of different explanations. And in general, the Abarbanel's opinion, and others, everyone has different opinions, but Abarbanel says there's many Mefarshim. The Abarbanel is one that says that everything was natural. That Yaakov was a professional shepherd. He knew exactly how to run the sheep. It was like we learned before, was a chachma, and in Mela he did it all naturally. Like someone told me, I didn't see this inside, but somebody told me that there's a letter of the Rebbe where somebody challenges this story of Yaakov Avinu, and he says that sometimes I've seen it in zoos or farms, whatever it is, that people put different patterns, and you don't see any differences in how the babies are born. So the Rebbe said, you can ask questions on Torah as much as you want, but Pasha, if you believe the story of Pashtus, between Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they had 100 years of experience of being shepherds. So don't go and tell them, oh, you just were in a zoo a few times, and you decided that it doesn't work. Obviously, if they were shepherds for so many years, they knew how things work. So maybe you can trust them that even Al Piteva was able to happen. What's with the Malachim? So the Barbanel says, with the Malach is more of Psatzlocha, Brocha, but it was really completely Al Piteva, the way Yaakov was able to make sure that all of the baby sheep and goats should have the patterns that he wanted them to. The Kliyakar says just the opposite. The Kliyakar says that it was all miraculous, and it was a nest with the Malachim. Either the Malachim came or they didn't come, but it was Mamish Nisim Al Piteva. It shouldn't have happened. And he says that he put up the sticks was only that it should have some kind of Achiza B'Teva. And it should look like it's natural. But really, says the Kliyakar, if you're going to try it at home, it's not going to work because it's a special miracle that Hashem did in order for Yaakov Avinu to become rich. And then the Rebbe brings a look at the Sichos, according to Rashi, that both things happened. There was an element or some of the sheep that were born naturally with these patterns as a result of the sticks that he made, and then there were some that it was a miracle that they ended up in those patterns the way the Yaakov made up with love. What exactly were the patterns and what exactly were the colors? So according to Rashi, Yaakov took only brown sheep. All the patterns that we talk about only apply to the goats. The akudim utlunis for the goats. But by sheep, Rashi says sheep there was no patterns. Sheep was brown and nothing else. However, according to the Ramban, he says that also by the sheep there were the patterns. There was the nekudim and tluim. Nekudim means spots, like in the bottom right. And the top right is called akudim. That's where you have only patterns on its arms and legs, and where you would tie it together. And on the left, at the bottom left, that would be the picture of stripes, would be vrudim. Pluim would be patches. I didn't have another picture of it, but that would be more like the black and white cows that we see all the time. That would be considered tului. Yeah, could be also. But the truth is that different patterns are not really considered separate species when it comes to sheep. In other, for example, by leopards and over there and those kind of wild cats, we say that the pattern on their skin is a different species. But by sheep, as far as I understand, different patterns are not considered a separate species. Maybe, yeah. The next famous shepherd is Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was a shepherd even before he took care of the Yidden. And here's a famous medrash that the medrash says that the Eibishter tested Moshe Rabbeinu to see if he's a good shepherd with tzoyin, and based on that he will see if he can take care of Klal Yisrael. What happened was that Moshe Rabbeinu was the roya of tzoyin shel Yisrael, and one day a gdi would mean a goat, but it means that one of the young animals ran away. Till it came to Chasis, and it ran away to basically was looking to drink, and it ran away till it came to Abreicha Shalmayim, to a pound of water, and started drinking. Moshe Rabbeinu was running after it. And when Moshe Rabbeinu saw that it's have to drink, Moshe Rabbeinu said, I didn't realize that you're running because you're so thirsty. And because of that, he picked it up and he carried it on the shoulder, and he said that if you're so thirsty, obviously you're probably tired as well. And Moshe Rabbeinu carried it back to the herd. So the Eibishter said, if you have such rachamim to take care of your tzoyin of a basar v'dam, so you can be the roya for my yidden, and that's why Moshe hayaroya, because Hashem chose him to take care of Klal Yisrael. Next famous shepherd is David HaMelech. Now David HaMelech is also a story. Now this story, because some people say it about Moshe Rabbeinu, but I found it about David HaMelech. Could be happening with both of them. And it says in the pasuk, "Vayikacheu mimichla is tzoyin." Hashem chose David HaMelech to be the king of the Yidden from being a shepherd for tzoyin. And Hashem tested him to be, and he saw that he's a good shepherd. So Hashem said, if you're a good shepherd for tzoyin, the same concept, but the test exactly was different. What was the test by David HaMelech? So it says that Mimichla means Vayikoli Ageshem, that David HaMelech would not allow certain sheep to go out at different times. The Seder was that he would not let the Gdolim, the older sheep, go out before the Ktanim. He would let the Ktanim go out, the younger sheep go out, in order for them to go out first and eat the soft grass, because the baby sheep, their teeth aren't developed as much, and they don't know exactly where to find the best grass. So if it's easy, soft, and open in front of them, they can eat it. And that's why he let them out first, and only after that he took out the Skenim, It's the older ones, the mamish older ones, that they have more experience, but their teeth aren't so strong. And then at the end, he will let the bachrim go out. The bachrim means that the young, healthy sheep, that these are the ones that can eat Esav, a kosher side. They could handle it, and side for them it's actually better that way, because if they could handle it, for them it's the best. So Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Misha Yideh Lirei Satzoin. Ish lefi koichoi, someone that knows how to take care of each individual sheep and give him what it needs. Yaveh v'yireh ba'ami, he'll be the shepherd of my nation. Hado d'chsiv mi'achar aloi seviri liris b'Yaakov Avinu.